I think it says TBA. Doug Perkins is going to come on Wednesday. Apparently you all have experienced his slideshow about research. I had asked him to come and do it. He said, well, they already heard it. I said, well, okay, come and let's talk about some of the issues that are raised in the context of the slideshow that he does on getting community-based research through the IRB. And so on Monday, let me ask you to return to the snow piece, snow at all, and pull out a couple of difficult issues that relate to research or intervention. And kind of come in and we'll throw them out and we'll see what kind of discussion we can have about them, okay? Okay. And I'd asked you very late in the game to think of a couple of issues in the book that I have done, and we could talk about those. But I thought we might just quickly try to get on the same page. And just very quickly review. We went over a fair amount of this yesterday, but so we're calling this a theory of reflective generative practice, a generative going to issues of the values involved in our work, and one of the values being generativity or human development. All right. And so we have the ethics of human development community suggesting that the values that this theory suggests should be promoted are human development on the one hand and community on the other. And I talked about the various dimensions of this, the knowledge dimensions, the method dimensions, and the intervention dimensions. And I skipped over and came to the ethical dimension. And so here we have the tragicomic triangle of power. I used, in my 1996 book, it was called the tragicomic professional. And that was meant to suggest that human person is tragicomic, that is imperfect, that is, that there are certain tragic, difficult dimensions of human existence, but there are certain positive things that we can achieve. So it's the hyphenated tragicomic, and you can't be, we're not fully tragic or fully comic, we're tragicomic. So that comes into this, where I call this the tragicomic triangle of power. And this is a theory of power out of Craig and Craig that talks about two basic dimensions of power. The power where we treat other people as things, I, it, where we play win and lose games and try to win and try to make the other lose, which is coercive power, and synergic power, where you treat the other as a person, and where we talk about win-win, not win-lose. And this is the power that could be called caring power, the kind of power that would be developed in the Meyerhoff book, kind of life that Meyerhoff would suggest you lead, a caring life, one in which you are helping and enabling others to grow and develop, and being concerned with your own development as well. And then the McKnight book, which says that very much here in the societal magnet, it's like the McKnight book is like a theory, mapping out of the societal magnet. He calls our society a careless society. That is, it works against caring. So we have an ethical theory in Meyerhoff and here that says work to be caring, work to promote human development and community. That's the ethical way to be. But the society has a way of working against you. And McKnight works it out in excruciating chapter and verse about how society works against you. In fact, I don't use McKnight with undergraduates because it's too discouraging. I mean, McKnight can convince you, like, just go home and forget it. Take a nap. Imbibe a foreign substance or something, because the society is so much working against you And this goes in part to Miguel's question about, well, if we're supposed to be cooperative and working with others and caring and community oriented, how come it's hard? Well, one reason is society structure, and as McKnight lays out, and the other, as I suggested, was within our own selves. There's a tension between the more wolf. Freud says we are wolves, we're predators, and so there's that dimension of us, which you may not want to acknowledge, but I do believe it's there, and it competes with the more synergic, helpful human development dimension of us. Stop. Go ahead.
I think one of the things that excuse me, bother me about this is that part that I feel like society is also kind of generative and moves in time and space.
True.
And so I think there are times when it moves towards being synergistic.
Yeah, because I had to put it someplace, and I put it on that side to suggest that it is more often than not working against you. But if one of the tasks is to change society, then maybe part of what you can do is move it in this direction, or at least move aspects of it in this direction. Yeah, there are definitely dimensions of society which are generative, right?
Yeah, and difference from community in terms of this is really macro versus a meso kind of level. Is that like we have more control over community changes versus societal changes?
Oh yeah.
And so.
True. But what Eric Fromm would argue is that the society has a strong influence on the various levels. In fact, what he does, along with a number of other psychoanalytic theorists, it says that the key values and ways of being in the world, human development ways of being in the world that children develop come from the family. Family is society's key human development enhancing institution. And Fromm writes at length about how the way society influences the family often to operate in a way that it is not passing on the kinds of values to kids that would be these kind of caring values. So Fromm, as a critical theorist, a kind of a devotee of both Freud and Karl Marx, would have you worry both about the psychological development of people and the kind of Marxist dimensions, political, economic, and social branches. So that idea goes way back, and I pick it up here. And I think it's an idea that for the most part is in part levels. Okay? Sometimes I feel like people have problems with the wolf, with man as wolf to man, and wonder if Freud got it wrong or overstated it. Does it make you uncomfortable to think that the human person is in part a wolf? That you, as a human person, are in part a wolf? Is that overstated? No?
No.
You think it's not?
No. I think about all the time about how, the environment is, I think about everything, the animals, plants, trees, humans, and we've taken over so much of it. We're so powerful in what we do. So, we are, the most powerful. I know that's kind of weird to think of that way, but
Sure.
We live in this world as if we are the dominant force. And who says that, who says?
Yeah. And you could argue we've been wolf to the environment.
Yeah.
You can be wolf to people and animals and the environment.
Mm-hmm.
We've been predatory relative to the environment. In fact, that's a pretty major issue, right?
Right.
So there is that dimension of us.
Mm-hmm.
That is, now again, is it more powerful than the pro-social caring part, as that tends to suggest? I don't know that that's true. And we've been talking about some of the latest developments in evolutionary theory that really say that we've overlooked the pro-social, cooperative, community-oriented dimensions of the human person. That is not just a kind of a add-on to the human person, that it's equally or maybe even more important than the survival of the fittest predatory within the evolutionary context. Now, I don't know about evolutionary theory to know, but there's an argument that goes on, that continues to go on about that. And I've read enough people in the evolutionary camp who do talk about the importance of the pro-social and the community-oriented, that I think it's probably definitely worth taking seriously. Okay, so, go ahead.
I'm just going to give an example. Because, like, for me, like, with the evolutionary theory and all of biology, the goal seems to always tie it back to the self and moving the self forward, even when talking about community. So this is how I got sort of mixed up. So, for example, there's this concept called Batesian mimicry, where you can have a monarch butterfly, which is poisonous to bears and anything that eats butterflies. And then there's this other butterfly that looks just like it that we see all the time, the orange with the black spots. And so these butterflies live together, you know, in the same niche, the same environment, but they have this cooperative relationship where, because there's just more butterflies, period, each of the species are getting eaten less. But then again, the mimicking butterfly species benefits from the poisonous one, because if a bear eats a poisonous one, it's going to avoid both species.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, to cohabitate in the same space is like a special decision to coexist, but only because it's still benefiting both groups. And so my orientation always takes me then back to, if community is going to be the goal, but our nature is that of the wolf.
An aspect of our nature.
Right, an aspect of our nature. It just seems like everything that we shape and mold in terms of socialization is towards the good. And that's why I feel like a lot of our nature is that of the wolf, because from the start you're taught rules, you're taught respect, you're taught all of these things. It's not what may or may not actually be the impulse or the internal drive, you know?
I think that's exactly it. I mean, like, we're taught survival of the fittest, and we're taught, you know, this idea of you got to look out for yourself and promote individual progress and individual, which is not necessarily true, which is not the only truth. I mean, that there are multiple truths, but it has been kind of a dominant theme that we've kind of internalized. And so
And
it's
I'm wondering
Well,
if it's
you know,
internalization or if it's deeper.
biology is epigenetic.
Right.
It's an interaction of the organism and the environment. So you can't just look at the organism or just look at the environment. Actually it's a transaction. It's an inseparable relationship. And so there's teaching and there's also impulse. They're in there together. Okay. And you know, it was. I don't know, Miguel, if when I was talking about the motor model, and we talked about O, and we talked about self relative to other. Is self more important than other, which is narcissism? Is self less important than other, which is altruism? And then there's this battle. There's one or the other. And then somebody like Jansen's comes along, as I mentioned, who says, no, it's equal regard, that they both are. So the self and the other are equally important. So it would be a mistake to frame it as either or. It's better to frame it as both and. Now, I'm not sure that solves all of the evolutionary problems you wrestled with when you were back in biology, but so yeah, there's the self is in there. Does come back to the self. And in the life that we lead, you know, there's you. I mean, there's you, the self, the person, are at, in some ways, the center of the life you lead. But immediately, you are also in relationship to others. The self is never isolated. The self is always in relationship to others. At least that's the line of argument that I'm making. So it's self in relationship to others, and then you can argue whether it's self greater than other greater than self, or equal regard. And equal regard becomes an ethic. It's an ethical position to work toward equal regard. Okay? So that if in some situations you've been sacrificing for the other, then maybe you need to kind of get some for yourself to get back to equal regard. Or if in some situations you've been lording it over some others and so on, maybe it's time to kind of be somewhat sacrificial and to give to others. And so that the ideal would be equal regard that we're working towards. Now that's the position that Browning got from Jansen's, and that once I found that makes some sense. Now, I don't know, it may or may not work, but so anything else before we leave this? This is sort of I mean, there's stuff here we were to do a lot more on. The new look in biological theory. The original interpretation of Darwin, not by Darwin but by Spencer, the survival of the fittest, was hugely influential throughout the 19th and 20th century. I'm reading Michael Bess's book, The Moral Dimensions of World War II. I think that's the title. You know, Michael is Kimberly's husband. And he has a whole chapter on the fact that Italy, Germany, England, France, Japan, and the United States, the major powers, all were operating according to a kind of survival of the fittest mentality. Not just the Nazis, as you think, because the Nazis are racist and so on and so on. Bess makes the case that everybody thought they were right because they were morally superior, and everybody was trying to get the advantage and so on. And that over a period of between, let's say, 1875 or 80, when colonialism came in, and when colonialism came in, 1850 or whatever. From there up through World War II, which is like whenever you want to begin at 1939 up through, everybody is thinking survival of the fittest, that there's some sort of biological basis for what we're doing. When we're firebombing Dresden, when we're dropping atom bombs on Hiroshima, when we're doing the rape of Nanking by the Japanese, he says that you look at the communiques and the rationales for what people are doing, and survival of the fittest is in there. And so here's a biological evolutionary idea that gets translated into the social world, into the way people do politics and war, and we have World War II, which was unbelievably destructive and bloody on every side. And that's a social theory. That's not, it's our genes coming out. That's an interpretation of Darwin that was being used to guide politics, economics, war, and so on. So, there is another possible interpretation, that is, you can put in the pro-social, and maybe that's one of the things we need to work toward, which is to convince people that biology and evolution doesn't inevitably and irreversibly move us in the wolf direction. That it equally and as much moves us in the synergic caring direction. And that we choose to work on that side and to develop theories and interventions and ethics and so on. So, I mean, I purposely develop an ethical theory that goes in that direction, that the preferred mode is synergic. But I think that if you fail to acknowledge the wolf dimensions of the human person, then you're going to be in trouble. You're going to be operating naively, and you're going to miss a whole lot. Okay. So it may take you a while to think through that. And listen, there are any number of other theorists who have posed these kinds of tensions. I like this model because it is a both-and model. Each of us is in the triangle. Like I said, Judy's right up there, close to the top, pretty damn synergic, and pretty far away from coercive. And you can decide where each of you is in the triangle. I may not have put you in the right place. You may be a lot closer to the synergic. Okay? All right, where's next? Now this is just this is something that came out of one of the great philosophers of the last and this century, Alasdair MacIntyre, and one of the most influential books of the last century, After Virtue, which MacIntyre wrote just before he came to Vanderbilt. I know this priest friend and I and a couple of people convinced MacIntyre to get together to do a little seminar for us on the book. Now, the idea that MacIntyre, he had a lot of ideas, he's a brilliant guy, but the big idea that he brought forward is the notion of practice. And practices. So you talk about a legal practice, a law practice, a medical practice. So think about what each of you is getting ready to do or is emerging as doing as community development and action or community research and action people. There's this set of activities that you're getting ready to engage in. This is a practice. This is your practice. Dental practice, dental, legal, architecture, and community research and action, community development and action, a practice, an organized set of activities. And the people who engage in this practice kind of decide what's right and what's wrong. A little bit like I said, that Hobbes did a survey in order to get the code of ethics of APA off the ground. It's a little bit like that. I mean, we don't necessarily take a survey, but you become part of a community. You get on a listserv, you listen to the faculty, you listen to each other, and you begin to develop a sense of what the right thing to do is within your practice. Okay? Now, this actually fits doctor, patient, therapist, client, lawyer, client a little better. But the client here could be community. All right? So assume, since that's where we are, it's community. So one of the things, the model of profession as practice. Now, a practice has two parts. There's the inner part, which is the practice itself, and then the institutional world that the practice is in. All practices are in institutional. So nobody is a Lone Ranger soul. There's always an institutional world that surrounds you. So that's the first thing to be said. That there's the practice itself, and then the institution within which it resides. Now, in the practice, there's you, the professional, and there's the client. And that arrow going down is a differential of power. Go back to the last slide, power. Power differential. Professionals are more powerful than clients by virtue of their knowledge and skill. Knowledge is power. skill is power. So your knowledge and skill gives you a power edge differential over the client. And I say that's always true. In any professional client relationship, there is a power differential. Now the question is whether the power, how does the power get used? And in this model, the internal goods, the goods internal to the practice, would be human development and community, as I've been suggesting. So the appropriate use of your power is to produce the human development, to enhance the human development of the other, and to develop the community life. And, as I suggested before, when you develop the other humanly, you develop humanly. Then that's the logic in the Meyerhoff book, like a feedback loop. You care, the other develops. If the other develops, you develop. Feedback loop. That's also win-win. So it's not like you're sacrificing for the other to grow. You may sacrifice for the other to grow, but if the other grows, then there's a feedback loop that you grow. And if you don't grow by it, if you can't enable the other to develop humanly, this is the key feature of burnout. When you can't get growth and development to happen for the other, then professionals burn out. And a lot of things can stand in the way of getting it done. So, use your power to enhance human development and community. Now, but there's another set of goods. These are internal goods. There are goods out here in the institutional layer. And these are goods like your own gratification, or usually it's money. So if a hospital forces a physician to order tests that a patient doesn't need because the hospital needs the money, needs to pay for the machine, knows that insurance will pay for it, then money is driving the behavior of the physician, not the human development and community of the client. And just as there's a tension between coercive and synergic, there's always a tension between external and internal. You know, money is the root of all evil, right? But try doing any good without money. Right? So, you can't not live in an institutional context. And the institutional context will often seem to require you to do things and to go in a direction that you don't want to go. But sometimes you have to bend in order to survive in that institutional context. So there's a tension between internal and external. And the way that tension goes is if in your practice, goods internal are generally stronger and more important than goods external, you're ethically golden. If goods internal are about equal, then you're kind of on the borderline. And every now and then you're going to go into a problematic area. If goods external are larger and greater than goods internal, then you're definitely in ethically problematic territory. All right? That's several simple-minded ideas put together in one diagram. Does it make sense? Do you see where this goes? So again, think of what you do as a practice, and think of your practice as having a tension, many tensions, but a tension between what you ought to be doing, which is promoting human development in the community, and a bunch of other things that push you. I'll give you an off-the-record example. Vanderbilt claims to be broke, at least to the faculty. externally we have all kinds of money, we're wonderful, big endowments. But internally, oh, the poor man, we have to cut. You have to generate more income, you have to cut back. It's departments to do a set of things for the sake of money, not for the sake of what we stand for as a department. It's one of the reasons I'm retired. I don't want to do it. So, you know, and it's subtracting some of the energy out of doctoral training in order to do a set of things that are going to doctoral training doesn't generate money. You guys cost a lot of money. You're expensive people. We love to have the expense because it's what we want to be doing. It's you're doing good stuff, we're doing good stuff, we're doing good stuff together, and so on. And so, but a university can be pushed to do things that for the sake of money. The use of now, I mean, I don't know for sure, but I can't pick up an education newsletter without talking about these massive online courses. Harvard's doing it, MIT's doing it, everybody's doing it. Vanderbilt is just getting on board a little bit about it. Well, I don't know. I wonder about it. I wonder about those massive online courses. I wonder to what extent they really are achieving, helping the university achieve its internal goods, or whether they're doing it ultimately for money. Now, it's not either or, but where's the balance? Is the balance to the internal goods of the university, or is the balance to the bottom line of the university? So you got that kind of dynamic going on all the time when you practice your practice. All right? That came out of McIntyre. Powerful, really powerful. A lot of professions found McIntyre and used the McIntyre framework to reflect upon itself. And professions found some things they didn't know there. All right? Questions about that? All right. And then there's the generative narrative, which we've talked about. So I'm not going to, that's the paper that you're doing for the midterm, past, present, and future. Now, this is two tables that are in the book, and they're about Model 1 and Model 2. And rather than getting into the guts of this and spending any time on it, just think of it this way. The traditional way of being a professional and practicing was Model 1. Model 1 is a top-down, expert-oriented practice, where Donald Sherman and others have tried to move us as practitioners is to Model 2. And the one word that best captures Model 2 is partnership. Expert, partner. Two contrasting ways. The traditional expert way, top down. The Model 2 way, which by the way is not bottom up, it's a combination of bottom up and top down, because it's the combination from the client and the contribution from the client and the contribution from the professionals, both. So, I mean, there were books written about this. Schoen's written The Reflective Practitioner and Educating the Reflective Practitioner. But this is a summary of them. And then we have the diagram that I started with last time, with the combination of the top down and the bottom up. And that's the ethical trick. How do we get these principles? Caring, veracity, autonomy, non-maleficence, beneficence, and justice. How do we get, they came to us from on top high. How do we get them to work on the ground where we live? How do we get them coming together? Now, to prime the pump of issues, and I hope you have a few anyway, issues that you think that you found in the book, some puzzlements and issues. I don't care, just questions like, what did you mean by, or did you really mean, but let me start with one that is troublesome. I assert that these are universal ethical principles, that they bind everyone, everywhere, all the time. And you remember how we did that in terms of Anne Frank. And you got to bring them together. But what about that? Does it make sense to maintain that the principles in an ethical theory like this are universal? Does it bother you? I know there are ethnic and group ethnic sensitivities in this room. National ethnic. I mean, yeah, you ain't sitting around here. Come on.
Well,
You
I
got colors
wonder
and races, huh?
how much of it, I mean, so, yes, you should tell the truth. In Islam, it actually says there are 3 times that you don't have to tell the truth. That you don't have to tell the truth anymore. You don't have to, you can lie to keep the tie of relationship between people, and spouses can lie to each other also for that same reason, to keep the tie of relationship with each other. So it's not universal because you already know that those 3 situations exist, but they exist in the everyday concrete situation. So, but any other space.
So
Tell me the
universal
truth.
with exceptions. this
Right.
time. Universal
So,
with exceptions.
I mean, and I think that's,
You mean it's always or okay for a husband to lie to a wife?
no,
Always.
only to keep the tie of relationship.
Oh,
If they
okay.
ask you a question that you know is going to hurt them and
All right.
make the relationship
Yeah.
bad, then, I mean,
Well,
that's the
but
space.
that sounds like this.
Right. That's what I'm saying.
Oh, okay.
That's, like, those are the exceptions, but those are in everyday concrete situations.
Yeah,
I
okay,
mean,
okay. I'm
so
sorry, I misunderstood
I
you.
feel like it is universal, even though I think that's within the religion. You know what I mean? I mean, I think the exceptions are the concrete situations. So,
Well, let me put it slightly differently. Is the veracity or duty to tell the truth that the 5 of us who are not Muslim have different from the obligation that you as a Muslim have to tell the truth?
mm, I don't think you should. I think ethically, you shouldn't make up things just to make up things. But I think that there are people who do that, not for any particular reason. They exaggerate,
All right.
they make up stories to make themselves more interesting. I think online, a lot of
Yeah.
falsehood happens. And I don't think that it has to. And so in certain concrete situations, like we talked about in
Yeah.
Frank, that was like really a situation. So I
Yeah.
don't know that everybody holds that.
Yeah,
that they
yeah,
have
well,
to
I
tell
was,
the
all
truth.
right, now, I use Cicely Bach's book, Lying, I mentioned that. Her basic reason for writing the book is there's too much lying going on. And she's writing a book to try to convince people to lie less. And she doesn't say it's never okay to lie. The book is about where you draw lines. And so the Anne Frank would be a case of you draw a line that that's a situation where lying is okay. Okay, but she writes the book because she's in some ways saying the majority way, I don't know if she goes that far, but maybe she almost goes that far. The majority way of being in the world is lying. Yeah, just too strong. Because without truth, you can't have a social system or a social world, a social system, a political system requires a certain amount of truth. But it's clear politicians lie. And as a matter of fact, she wrote this book. The first was after the Watergate. Watergate was early 70s, when mostly in Washington, you knew people were lying if their mouth was moving. It led to the almost impeachment and resignation of the president, and people going to jail, and wow, it was just unbelievable amount of lying. But there were lots of other examples of lying, and so she writes this book trying to reasonably, rationally get people to understand why lying is harmful and when it might be okay. So, lots of it going on. Lots of it going on. But what I was asking is Muslim telling the truth somehow? This is a stupid question. I'm going to ask it anyway. Is Muslim telling the truth or lying somehow different from Christian telling the truth or lying? Is somehow the fact that you are Muslim and I am Christian and your religion talks about lying a certain way and my religion talks about lying a certain way, does that make the principle of veracity different because they are being articulated by different religions?
I think the knowledge that it's not absolute might change the way that you, I do think, I mean, lying in Islam is still a major sin, but because it is a major sin, those acknowledgments are made, because in 3 places it's not. So it is considered morally wrong to lie, except for 3 situations. And so I do think it is like an ethic within Islam, but I think you look at it full. I think there's less ambiguity maybe in Islam, because I think you don't you know when it's okay and when it's not, whereas there might be more ambiguity in other faiths. If you say it is universal and you have to tell the truth all the time, and you have that.
Well, you know, I mentioned that St. Augustine said you have to tell the truth all the time. And that was an early Christian. And I mentioned that Immanuel Kant said that too, and he was not a Christian, he was a secular theorist, and that was like 18th century. It's hard to maintain that you have to tell the truth all the time. You see the movie Liar Liar, Jim Carrey? And then you're supposed to tell the truth for a certain period of time, and demonstrate you can't do it. All right. So there seems to be a certain amount of lying that has to go on. In other words, you have to allow it in. But Bach would say, okay, they'll allow it in, but we want to keep it to as much of a minimum as we can. All right, and so, well, I don't know. Anybody else have any feelings about universal ethics? Does that offend you, or does it make any sense at all?
It makes sense, but there's another one besides tell the truth. I see myself on a plane and I have to chunk things out the window. And telling the truth was the first to go for me. But the second one, it's bad, isn't it? Is justice. So thinking about justice in a universal term, as a universal element, was something that I've just been kind of challenging myself with at the minute, because even thinking about my own work right now, how I'm focusing on one community, I'm thinking about overall justice, but with my work, my goal is to advance this one community. And so if I had to choose a situation where I would put my efforts into my one community, or if there are two people and one is a member of the community that I work for and not a member, then I wouldn't necessarily choose justice on that everyday concrete situation, but
there might
be
be, there
thinking-
might be a theory of justice that covers exactly what you're talking about.
And I feel like we've gone across that, but.
Yeah, well,
just-
but, you know,
Mhm.
we talked about, you know, you're gonna grab a kid or you're gonna grab a stranger, right? If you grab your kid and the stranger dies, was that an act of injustice? Was that an unjust act?
Right, it's,
I suppose you could make an argument one way or the other, but I'm just pointing out that it depends. One of McIntyre's books, I wonder if I can spy it on the shelf. It's called "Whose Justice, Which Rationality," and it's a survey of the major philosophical schools of thought, and especially ethics, over the last, well, actually, it includes Christianity and Judaism, so it's over the last couple of thousand years, that there are different modes of thought, and each mode of thought tends to have a different understanding of justice. So justice isn't one thing. In my system, I tend to define justice as treat like cases alike in different cases differently. Like cases alike. Different cases different. Suggesting that differential treatment is part of justice. So, is special ed just? Costs more money? Well, it's not there. It's a lot more expensive and labor intensive. So does that mean that special ed kids getting lots more money in resources per capita than non-special ed kids? Is that unjust?
Doesn't it depend on the feature you make salient for difference or similarity? So, for example, if the feature is ability, then yes, you should treat differently. You should give more resources to kids that have lower ability for some reason. If the feature you choose is resources, what people do they have resources to develop themselves? Then the criteria would be income, let's say. So you will get more resources to poor kids, no matter whether they are fully able or have some disability, and you will leave rich kids, even if they have disabilities, kids from rich families, even if they have disabilities, you would say, well, their parents can do it on their own. So, and it becomes controversial, and then people say, well, what should we focus on? What's the more
Absolutely.
important?
But you're demonstrating that differential treatment goes on,
Mhm.
special ed, programs for poor kids. How about affirmative action? Want to try that one? Supreme Court's about to do away with it, unfortunately, but affirmative action is unequal treatment on the basis of race.
No, it's more than that, though. It's sort of the basis of structural restraints, too. It's sort of an entire structure that has historically been racist. And it's a sort of institutionalized.
Oh, I agree with you, but that's an argument. in
Treating the
fa-
different cases differently.
That's an argument in favor of affirmative action.
Yeah.
But there are people, including a number of people, Supreme Court justices, who don't
Yeah.
buy it. Okay? But it seems to me that some, not only allowing, but encouraging certain differential treatments is absolutely necessary for a good society. Absolutely essential.
It's like the equity equality argument. Like, You know, if she's 4 feet, you're 5, and you're 6, and we all got to see out the window. Do we each get a box apiece to stand on, or do you get 2? And,
Yeah.
you know, equality would be everybody being able to see out the window, not everybody having equal.
Well, it's,
utility
it's,
of
it's,
resources.
yeah, it's equal at the starting line or equal at the finish line.
Mhm.
There are various metaphors that you use to talk about this. But, I mean, for me, and for some other, I can't imagine a good society without differential treatment. And, you know, in my own, so for example, how do I get to that place? I'm very strongly influenced by Catholic social teaching. And one of the dimensions of Catholic social teaching was called the differential option for the poor. And that option said that we ought to be working on behalf of the poor. That's right, to try to improve the lot of the poor. Do whatever you can to improve the lot of the poor. You know, not everybody buys that. There's an interesting dimension of preferential option for the poor, which is an epistemological, which says, run around behind the poor people and look out through their eyes. See the world through the eyes of poor people. And let that be your guiding truth.
It's like the veil of ignorance involves to a certain extent. You know, you try and imagine a society you want to live in where you could be in any position.
Yeah,
You don't
yeah.
know.
Well, of course, that's
It's not
Rawls.
exactly the same
That's
thing, but
Rawls.
it's the same process.
Well, it's Rawls trying to create a just society.
Yeah.
I mean, it's his book called The Theory of Justice.
Yeah.
And he uses the veil of ignorance. Now, this is a little different, I think. It's like role playing. Role playing is when you try to understand the world through the eyes of the other. It's also called perspective taking. Stones in development is when the child can see the world through the eyes of another child.